tend to fear what we don't understand or can't see, right? And I think this is part of the fear that rises with things like dementia, Alzheimer's, cognitive decline, because there's a whole lot going on there that maybe we don't understand quite as well, or can't see, or can't kind of physically manage as well as we might other aspects of our health. So, when other areas of our body or our health are struggling, we kind of have these really physical, visual signs, things like maybe weight gain or joint pain or elevations in blood pressure. And for the most part, with those things, we have some level of knowledge of what we need to do there to manage those things, to decrease the symptoms and improve our health outcomes in those areas. But when it comes to brain health, I think there's a little bit of a gap. There's a whole lot of unknowns there for a lot of people, which can raise levels of fear around this topic. There might be things like, we don't really have clear signs and symptoms. It's more, down the track we start to perhaps get some memory loss or lack of clarity or of cognition and whatnot. There's no actual discomfort. Our brain doesn't feel pain as such. And to make matters worse, we know that there can be a genetic component there, and perhaps if there's a family history of dementia or cognitive decline, we can have some fears around that as well, because we don't know whether that's going to be impacting us or not. So there's all these unknowns, and it's really interesting when I talk to people in general about aging and longevity and health and wellness and whatnot. Cognitive function is one of the bigger fears that arises, and I can kind of understand why this is. So I want to talk about this a little bit today, because there's a ton of positive aspects to this as well when it comes to brain health. In fact, if you look at the research, and this is being really conservative with the numbers here, up to 90% of Alzheimer's cases are now known to be potentially avoidable. That means that they are not genetically driven. So up to 3% of all cases are truly genetically driven, and the rest are driven by nutrition and lifestyle choices, which puts the ball firmly back in our court as far as managing them is concerned, because that's all stuff that we have control over. So then it's understanding, well, what are the things that we do on a day-to-day basis that have a significant impact on how well our brain ages? Because we know that, from about the age of 30, our brain size, volume, structure, etc. tends to start decreasing down. And so we really need to be addressing this from well before we're getting signs and symptoms that our brain has, got issues. Because a lot of those, perhaps most memory loss or those cognition issues, might not show up until sort of, 60s or late 60s or even into the 70s. But by then, you've potentially had 30 or 40 years of, changes that are not so positive, but there just hasn't been any telltale signs. So let's dive into it. I want to talk through these today. If you don't know me, I'm Mandy. I'm the clinical nutritionist for Body Reset, and there is nothing that I love more than taking the science, distilling it down into daily actionable habits which truly impact people's health and wellness and all of that in the long term. So let's go through 3 things here, and then I'm going to sum it up at the end, because I think it's really interesting that often the actions are the simple things we may already be doing or may already know. And we often say to our clients, more often than not, we need to be reminded more than we need to be taught. And so some of this might be like, I'm already doing that, or I already knew that, but it's the confidence to know that actually those simple things are really having a big impact on your brain, on your health, on your cognition in the long term. So the first one is we need to make sure we're actually eating enough. And this one's really relevant for a lot of people nowadays, because body composition is really, really important. We have an obesity epidemic. There is a problem there. So there needs to be some sort of management of that. But in our management of that, particularly as we get past about the age of 40, and if you're a female, we throw into that the hormone factor as well, we need to be looking at more than just dieting to lose weight and be a smaller person. Because when we're chronically, constantly dieting, yo-yo dieting, under-eating, fasting, fad dieting, all of those things, we're having extended periods of time where our brain is likely not getting the nutrients that it needs to function well, to repair well, and to really, maintain its function, size, and structure over the long term. So our brain is made up of a whole lot of protein, but a whole lot of fats as well. And it's very, very energy hungry. It only takes up about 2% of our actual body size, but it uses about 20% of the energy that we intake on a daily basis. So it's incredibly hungry. And I think this is so relevant now, because a lot of us do mentally demanding jobs. We're not necessarily physically using our body in the same way, but really mentally quite demanding. We need to be fueling our brain well. And if we're kind of going through these stages and patches of just under eating, under fueling, in a bid to manage body composition, which like I said is absolutely important, then we are running the risk of damaging our brain in that process. And if they look at do brain scans of people that have been doing chronic dieting for a very, very long time, there's actual physical signs of brain atrophy occurring, which is incredibly scary. Some of that cognition loss can be regained, but the brain atrophy or the shrinking of the brain is not so easy to regain. So it's something we want to avoid happening in the first place. So when it comes to body composition or looking to manage weight well, it's really important that we do that really intelligently. It can't just be all eat less, eat less, eat less. It needs to be looking at how am I making sure that I'm still supplying the nutrients that my brain needs to function, heal, recover, rebuild, and all of those sorts of things, while improving body composition. And that's where it's looking more at, management of blood sugars, prioritizing muscle mass to manage our basal metabolic rate and our metabolic health and all those sorts of things, rather than just being a smaller version of ourselves that is hungry and perhaps quite underfed. The other aspect to the underfeeding, I guess, which is a little different, is actually high performance athletes who really do need to eat a lot of food and perhaps often are underfueling a little bit. And this is seen sort of in that more performance, endurance, athletic space, where those people do tend to eat on the lower side of perhaps what their energy needs are. So that's a really important factor as well. The next one I want to talk about is movement. Now, Ollie actually talked about movement and exercise in his video last week and just kind of drew the distinction that not all movement is created. This is the same. It has different impacts, just as a piece of steak has a different impact in our body to a piece of potato. Going for a run has a different impact in our body to lifting a dumbbell, for example. And I think the thing with movement is we kind of lump it into this generalized category of we just need to move. And there's a couple of components I want to tease out of this, and that is number one, and this one's a little scary actually, is that potentially 50% of Kiwis, and I would bet Australia's probably very similar, don't even meet the very, very low bar that the World Health Association sets as a minimum amount of daily of exercise activity across a week. So that's set at about 150 minutes of activity across a week, which works out to about 21 minutes a day. And up to 50% of Kiwis don't even meet that, right? So we've got a problem just of movement in general. But if we go a layer deeper to that, maybe you do already move, there's more nuance to it than that when it comes to protecting our brain. So there's the cardio aspect. This is anything that kind of elevates your heart rate. This could be running, cycling, rowing, those sorts of things. These have a real positive impact on the brain because of the impact that has on blood flow. So it improves your blood vessel elasticity, it improves the contractibility and the pumping of your heart, and it improves capillaries and those small blood vessels which actually take blood to your brain and get oxygen to your brain. So that's a really important part, and it's more than just gardening or cleaning. Those things are movement, yes, but they're not intentional exercise that has this positive effect. There's a therapeutic, just like with supplements, a small amount is fine. Yeah, it's not going to hurt, but it might not have a therapeutic effect. And with movement, it's the same. All movement's good movement, but therapeutic movement is intentional. And for our brain health, as we age, we need to be getting intentional cardio kind of elevations of our heart rate at points in time. The other aspect is resistance training. Again, this is more than just digging a hole or lawn mowing or any of those slightly more physical activities. This is intentional contraction of muscle. And how this really helps your brain is that when you contract muscle, your muscles release hormones and myokines, which are protein that's released from your muscles that are messengers to the brain. And what these actually do is they tell your brain to grow, produce new neurons. So you actually can change the structure, the size, and the connection of all of your brains and neurons by doing resistance training. And, the decline of brain health is most often seen in the memory areas of the brain and then the focus areas of the brain. And these are the two areas that seem to get the very, really, really good benefit from resistance training. So if you value your cognition, if you value your brain function, your mental clarity, your ability to focus and remember things and actually, ultimately be the person that you are, then exercise, intentional exercise, is not just an optional nice to have. It's something that has to be built into your day as part of what you do, in the same way as eating, sleeping, drinking water, etc. is built into your day. Then the last one is sleep. I've talked quite a lot about sleep recently in various trainings that I've been doing, but there's a couple of key things that we want to know with sleep. When it comes to sleep, for brain health, it's not just about length of time. So some people do actually sleep quite a long time during the night, but the important part for brain health is actually the quality of sleep. So it's actually getting into deep sleep and REM sleep. Two different things going on here. With REM sleep has an impact on our memory consolidation. So it's how we store and process the learnings that we've had through the day, and how our ability to recall those things is really in that REM sleep stage. Deep sleep has its own special function. During deep sleep, we get what's called lymphatic clearance, and it's this like wave motion that goes through our central nervous system and through our brain to clear out cellular debris, proteins, and all sorts of things that can accumulate in and around our brain that can create some of the disconnect between our neurons. So when they look in the brains of people with Alzheimer's and dementia, they see the buildup of these things. You've probably heard these terms, tau proteins or amyloid beta or plaques and whatnot. The deep sleep is when we get that pulsing of central nervous system kind of fluid through our brain to help clear and process some of those things out. So it's not just about time asleep, but it's actually about getting into those deeper layers of quality sleep, getting into deep sleep to get that kind of washing of our brain. And this is why when it comes to sleep, it's not something that's just like a debt that you can pay off. You know, you can't just sleep in longer on a Saturday morning to make up for all of the late nights that you worked through the week, because that deep sleep tends to happen in our earlier sleep stages of the night and not necessarily so much into the morning hours. And mess begets mess, right? The more mess there is, the easier it is to mess it up, and it just kind of gets worse and worse, and the deep sleep that you're getting might not be enough to undo the mess that has not been cleared up that can accumulate. So sleep's really important, and it's not something that you can just kind of pay off as a debt down the track. It needs to be had on a regular basis, night on night. So this is why sleep habits are so important. So, you know, if the goal is a healthy body, we really need a healthy brain to be able to run that, right? Nothing in the body works independently. And I say this to a lot of women that I work with who are looking for support in and around the hormonal space, is that we want to not underestimate the power of the little things that we do. The looking after the little things, like how we eat, how we sleep, how we move on a day-to-day basis, that all has flow-on effects to how our hormones function, and in this case, how our brain functions. And so when it comes to actually looking after our brain health, it's not so much about all of the fancy things we could do, and there are things, right? There's some really cool supplement options, more nuanced kind of things that you could do to really look after your brain, but it starts with the foundational basics, and if you haven't got those in place, then we don't want to be going to the fancy things, because nothing fancy works till you nail the basics, right? So really, I guess the message I want you to take away from this is just not underestimating the power of those little things you may already be doing or that you need to start with. And look, we have over 300 clients in the Body Reset program at the moment who are all going through this, who are working and intentionally putting time and effort into those little daily habits, starting with, you know, hitting a protein target that actually optimizes for health span, and not just, you know, the RDA, which is nowhere near enough, or actually eating enough to fuel your body well so that it can function well, so that it can kind of burn off that excess body fat, not just trying to starve yourself lean. Doing things like getting out on a morning walk, getting some sunlight in your eyes to help regulate your circadian rhythm to improve your sleep quality. All of those little things have a massive impact on how well our brain's going to function, and I guess ultimately the trajectory of our brain health in the long term. And I think because it's an organ which doesn't give us signs, it just works away doing its thing, we really want to be looking after it from as early as possible. As early as you become aware of this, we need to be making the time and effort and putting some intention into this. So if brain health is something that you value, if cognition is something you want to protect, I would encourage you to head over to our website. It'll be linked below if you're watching this on YouTube, and just see whether working with us directly might be something that would be helpful and supportive for you. Hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this was interesting and gave you a few things to take away today. I'll see you next time. Bye.